Okay guys, today we're going to talk about succession. And so succession is we're going to talk about it as changes over time. So please make sure that you're following along. There is a lot to type in with this one, but the most important part is going back and reviewing over your notes and trying to understand that there are two different types of succession and how they both begin. That's what you guys need to know. How do they begin? They both end the same, so that's important. Okay, so it's just a change over time. They just change a little bit different. Okay, so succession is a natural change in communities of an ecosystem over time. So it's something natural that occurs from maybe a natural disturbance, maybe like a hurricane, a tornado, a fire, something like that causes an ecosystem to change over time. So we're going to talk about the first one, that's primary succession. Primary succession is where no life has begun there. It's beginning with bare rock. So it's a place of populations in an area that has not previously supported life. So basically, there has not been any life supported here, but over time, things are going to happen to the community. This change is going to happen and bring us to this climax community. So what you need to know is primary succession is a type of succession where bare rock is the first part of that succession. There's nothing there. There's no life, there's no soil, nothing is there, just bare rock. So something's going to cause this environment to change over time to get to that climax community. So the first thing that happens in primary succession from bare rock is these spores, these fungus, algae type of bacteria stick to this rock, right? Wind kind of blows it in and it sticks to this rock, and then they end up dying over time. And so the soil is created there to cause soil for other things to grow. So smaller grasses are going to grow there because the lichens have died, causing a little bit of soil. And then once the grasses die, it creates more soil. So we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but one important key that I want you guys to remember is P. If you draw a little line there, it looks like an R. So primary succession starts with rock. That's super important. There's only two different types of succession that we're going to talk about, but primary succession begins with rock. Okay, there's no soil there. Okay, so we're going to talk about pioneer species. That's the first thing to live in the new area where there was bare rock. So first, again, there's bare rock, and then you have these pioneer species that are called lichens. The lichens are these again, they're like a mossy type of fungus. It's a bacteria algae type of thing that kind of gets swooped onto these rocks, and they end up dying because they don't have enough nutrients to live on the rocks. So the dead lichens and the rotten remains of those lichens, they decompose and they make just a little bit of soil, enough soil so that little mosses can grow here. So again, to recap, we start with bare rock. The lichens, this moist type of bacteria algae, sticks to the rocks. They die, and they cause a little bit of soil for the next habitat, the next living organism to grow there. So again, pause as you need to and write in your notes. Okay, so seeds are blown in by the wind or carried in by animals so that these little mosses can start growing. So the wind will kind of blow them and put it into the little amounts of soil that is there so that when the mosses end up growing, again, there's not enough enrichment for them to kind of stay there and live there, so they end up dying as well. And it grows a little bit more soil, so everything that dies ends up decomposing back into the ground and creating a little bit more soil for the next thing to grow. So simple plants like mosses can grow in the new soil, but then those mosses and plants die, and then you get more soil for the next type of plants. Okay, so herbs and weeds can grow in the thicker soil, and roots of plants hold the soil in place. The soil gets a little bit thicker, and then even grasses and other plants can begin to take over. And even smaller birds and insects can start to move into this area. And what do you think is going to happen to the small grasses? Again, there's not enough nutrients to kind of keep all the grasses and the small animals there. So those are going to end up dying. And when those die, they end up creating more soil for the next type of environment, for the next type of growth to happen. Okay, and as you see, this is happening over hundreds of years. So this is taking a long time for these grasses and small animals and things like that to die and then decompose back into the soil. Okay, so when we get to this point, we can start having medium-sized animals make their way into this environment. You have some shelter for them, you have some food for them, but then there starts to become some competition as they don't have enough space to kind of live in this small tree type of environment, small shrubs. They don't have enough space to survive. So, and then as these organisms in this intermediate stage kind of end up dying, what happens to them? They decompose into the soil. See how the soil's growing and growing over time? The more soil that you get, the taller the trees, the more shelter, the more food that can grow in that area. So after these organisms die in the shrubs, the trees, they can start to kind of survive in that area only up into a certain point. Then as you see, the trees kind of start competing here for sunlight, and the smaller ones can die and decompose and go back into the soil. Okay, so hope I didn't go too fast there, but you guys are pausing, right? Filling out your notes. So as the soil deepens, larger trees can then grow. Larger animals can inhabit the area, and then you kind of get to this climax community. Again, pause as you need to fill out your notes. Okay, so the important thing to understand, so just a recap on primary succession. Primary succession is an area where there was no life before. There's only bare rock. This can be caused by a volcanic eruption. You know, a volcano, the lava, once the lava cools, all that's behind is rock. So, and then also retreating glaciers, which we call like ice melting. So once ice melts off of mountain caps, all it leaves behind are rocks. So these are areas that are prone for primary succession. Life will eventually start to grow on that cold volcano or those ice mountaintop ranges that melted. So life will eventually grow on it. And again, what you need to know is there's no soil at the beginning of primary succession. Primary succession is just bare rock. There's nothing living there. So that means that there's no biomass. Biomass is this dirt here. Okay, the soil. So there's no biomass here. And we end up having these lichens that blow in the wind and stick to the rocks. The lichens end up dying, but these are the pioneer species. This is the first living thing to live in this area where there was no life before. Okay, so this can take a very, very long time for this to occur. But once you get to this point, primary and secondary that we're going to talk about in a minute are pretty much the same. You guys just need to know the difference between how primary and secondary begin. Primary begins with rocks, and the first living thing, the pioneer species, is a lichen. Okay, and this bare rock, where does that come from? It comes from volcanoes, or it comes from the ice melting off of mountain caps. Okay, so we're going to talk just a little bit about climax community, but just know that that's an environment where everything's good. You can have your big animals there, your big plants, your tall trees, the biomass, which is the total amount of organisms that are there in the dirt and the soil. There's a lot of dirt or soil, okay, because everything before it has died to cause this large amount of soil here. So we've got plenty of rich soil so these big tall trees can grow there. And the diversity, just think about your classroom? Is your classroom very diverse, right? Do you have a lot of different ethnic groups and different, well, if it's not, then it's not very diverse. But in a climax community, it's very diverse because we have lots of different types of trees, lots of different types of animals, plants, all different kinds of things. But if we're here at Bear Rock, that's very low or no biodiversity. There's no diversity here. All we have is rock. So as we go down through primary succession, we have a huge biodiversity. Okay, so this is an area that used to be under ice a couple of decades ago. So see how there's some greenery growing on the rocks? We're already to the point where we've pretty much made it through, almost halfway through. There's some areas here where there's still ice melting. Once all the ice is gone, then those lichens will start to stick to the rocks, and then we'll start going through primary succession in this area. I'm sorry. Okay, so again, you just have bare rock, and then moss or this lichen starts to kind of grow, and then it dies, and then it causes these smaller types of grasses to grow there. The grasses end up dying and causing dirt on the rocks, and then the taller trees can start to grow there. Okay, this is a very similar, this is what it looks like when there's some open water and then you have some fish and things like that. Well, as the fish end up dying in the area, it causes more dirt to be there. Even these small little grasses that live underwater, all of those things die and cause more and more soil. And as more and more animals and plants die in that area, it kind of dries up the water because everything is died and caused more and more soil to be there. But then it's super rich for plants and other animals to grow, or plants to grow there and animals to move in. Okay, so just to recap, which of the following could cause a primary succession? Think about the two different ways that we talked about primary succession happening. A forest fire, ice melting on mountain caps, a hurricane, or a shopping mall being built. So make sure you press pause and try to see what you think. Okay, so the answer is a glacier retreating, so ice melting, meaning you're leaving behind bare rock. That's primary succession. Okay, now we're going to talk about secondary succession in the second video because I'm going to run out of time. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here, and then you can click on part 2 of succession and fill out the rest of your notes for secondary succession.